Hello and welcome to the channel Echoes Shadows. Have you ever imagined what truck drivers face on deserted roads, far from everything? In today's video, you'll hear 4 real and terrifying stories from truckers who encountered much more than just the silence of the night. Get ready for chilling tales that will give you goosebumps. Comment below if you've ever had a supernatural experience. Stay until the end and find out what they experienced. Leave a comment if you've ever had an unexplainable experience. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming stories. Thank you very much. Story 1. Between the Fog and the Darkness.
My name is Mark, and I've been a trucker for over 15 years. I live in Wichita, Kansas, and I've driven through every kind of road this country has to offer. I was never one to believe in ghost stories, the kind you hear from other drivers at rest stops. I always thought it was just talk, people trying to scare each other. But there's one night that changed everything. I was on a run from Wichita to Amarillo, Texas. It was late at night, and I had just hit Route 287, a long, empty stretch of road with hardly any streetlights. My rig was loaded, but I knew the road well, so I thought it'd be just another regular drive. What I didn't know was that this night would be anything but normal. The first strange thing was the fog. Out of nowhere, this thick fog rolled in, so dense I could barely see a few feet ahead. It wasn't just the usual night mist. This fog seemed to rise from the ground, swirling around the truck like it had a mind of its own. I started feeling uneasy, but I kept driving, slowly, with the high beams on. That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. There on the side of the road was a woman. She was just standing there in the fog wearing white, her hair wet and clinging to her face. It didn't make any sense for someone to be out there in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere. She stood still, staring at me, but her eyes, they were empty, like she wasn't really there. I drove past her trying not to stare, but something made me glance in the rearview mirror, and that's when I froze. She was gone, just vanished, like she had never been there. I kept driving, trying to shake off what I'd seen, but the road felt heavier, like time had slowed down. That's when my truck's radio started to static, this weird interference. And through the crackling noise, I swear I heard a voice, a faint whisper calling my name. I gripped the wheel tight, looking around the cab, trying to figure out where it was coming from. My mind was racing, but I knew I couldn't stop. Fear was crawling up my spine, and all I wanted was to get off that road as fast as possible. Then things got worse. Up ahead, I saw a wrecked truck on the side of the road. It looked abandoned. No lights, no movement. The area was deserted, but something told me not to stop. I passed it slowly, and that's when I felt it. The temperature in the cab dropped, and in the corner of my eye, I saw someone sitting in the passenger seat. It was her, the woman, but this time she was inside the truck. I didn't have the courage to look directly at her, but I could feel her there. A chill ran through me, and my heart was pounding. She didn't speak, but her presence was suffocating. The next few miles were a blur. Every turn I thought I saw figures at the edge of the road, shadows moving too fast to be real. The dashboard lights started flickering, and the radio kept turning on and off by itself. I was praying for it to be over. The road felt endless, and with every passing minute, I felt more and more like something was dragging me down. Then I hit a stretch of hills, and that's when everything fell apart. The truck suddenly lost all power, lights, engine, everything. I was stuck in complete darkness, in the middle of nowhere. The radio was still hissing, and I didn't know what to do. Then I heard it again, that whisper, "Leave." My breath caught in my throat, and I knew I couldn't stay there. With shaking hands, I tried the ignition again. Miraculously, the engine roared back to life. I floored it, heart racing, and didn't stop until I reached a small town outside the cursed road. I pulled into a gas station and sat there, trembling. I didn't know what had happened, but I was sure it wasn't from this world. To this day, whenever I drive through that area, I get a strange chill. And the worst part? I've never told anyone about it. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw, and every time I think back to that night, I feel the same cold fear crawling up my spine. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't from this world.
Story 2. Lost in the Night.
My name is Luke, and I live in Savannah, Georgia. I spend most of my life on the road. Ever since I was young, I've always had this fascination with the highway, the freedom, the wind hitting the window, and the solitude that, for some reason, always brought me peace. But all of that changed on a trip I made to Louisiana. That day was unlike anything I've ever experienced, and to this day, I still don't know what really happened. I left Savannah around 3 in the afternoon, calm, with my destination set for Baton Rouge. I was driving my truck loaded with ship parts, just another routine job. The route along I-95 was familiar, but midway through I decided to take a secondary road, Highway 190. I wanted to avoid traffic and shave off a few hours. The sun had already set by the time I got on that road. There were almost no cars, no houses, just trees on either side. By around 10 at night, the full moon lit up the path, but there was an eerie emptiness on that road. That's when it started. First, I heard a noise that seemed to come from inside the cab, like something was moving around in the compartments. I glanced back and saw what looked like a shadow shifting between the boxes. My heart skipped a beat. I pulled over onto the shoulder, turned off the engine, and went to check. Nothing. No box was out of place. The shadow had vanished. I took a deep breath and got back on the road, but the feeling that someone was there with me didn't go away. The road felt longer and longer. Time passed, but I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. Then out of nowhere, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. I didn't have time to swerve. I slammed on the brakes, and the truck skidded, sliding until it came to a full stop. When it finally did, I looked out the window. Nothing. Fear began to creep in. Something was wrong with that road, but I had to keep going. I started the engine again, my hands trembling on the wheel. Then I saw ahead a couple walking along the side of the road. They were moving slowly, heads down, like they were lost. I thought about stopping to help, but something about them didn't feel right. As I passed them, I checked my rearview mirror, and once again, they had disappeared. No trace, no sign. Just the empty road. With every mile, the sense of dread grew. The silence was overwhelming. Then I started hearing something else. Footsteps, like someone was walking around the truck. I checked my mirrors, but there was no one. Suddenly, a sharp sound, like nails scratching the metal, came from the passenger side. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I floored the gas, trying to get out of there as fast as I could. What happened next still keeps me up at night. The truck's radio turned on by itself, and through the static, a voice came through. Faint, but clear. "Turn back. You're not supposed to be here." It was a woman's voice, and there was no doubt now that something was following me on that road. I looked around, and suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a face on the passenger window. It was a woman, her eyes wide with a distorted smile, like she was mocking my fear. Panic took over. I couldn't think anymore. I just drove. The streetlights began flickering, and the road seemed to stretch on endlessly. It felt like I was never going to reach my destination. The feeling of being trapped in that nightmare kept growing until something exploded in front of me. A flash of light flooded the road, and the truck swerved to the right. Everything went black. I woke up hours later, the truck parked at a gas station, the engine off. I don't remember how I got there. The attendant came over to ask if I was okay, said he saw me pull in but that I looked out of it, like I was in a trance. I tried to explain what happened, but he just laughed, saying lots of truckers who drive that road report similar things. I wasn't laughing. Since that day, I've never driven down Highway 190 at night again. Every time I think about it, a chill runs down my spine. I don't know if it was the road or something else. All I know is, that night, death rode with me, and by the slightest chance, I didn't become just another shadow on the side of the road.
Story 3. Laughter in the Dead of Night.
My name is Robert, and I've been a truck driver for over 20 years. I've seen it all on the road. Terrible accidents, storms that felt like they'd never end, and lonely nights where only the sound of the engine kept me company. But nothing I've ever experienced prepared me for what happened that night, at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. It was around 2 a.m. I was on my way back from a long haul, driving from Houston to a small town in Kansas. The highway was empty, pitch black, and the silence of the night was overwhelming. After hours of driving, I was exhausted, my eyelids heavy. I decided to stop at a gas station on the side of the road, a rundown spot that seemed almost abandoned, barely lit. But at that moment, it was exactly what I needed: a bathroom break and a few minutes to stretch. As soon as I stepped out of my truck, a strange feeling washed over me. The air was unnaturally cold for a summer night, and the station was completely deserted. No cars, no cashier behind the counter, not even the hum of a radio. The only sound was the creaking of an old sign swaying in the wind. The door to the men's room was open, swinging slightly in the breeze, creaking eerily. I stepped into the bathroom, the flickering light inside only adding to my unease. The place was small, just 2 urinals and a stall. The floor was clean, but the silence was oppressive. Only the sound of my footsteps echoed in the cold tiles. I went to one of the urinals, trying to ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. That's when I heard the first sound. A low laugh, barely audible, echoed through the bathroom. It came from somewhere behind me. I spun around, my heart racing, but the place was empty. Nothing. I quickly checked the stall, but it was vacant too. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself that it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. I went back to the urinal, trying to finish up and leave as fast as possible. But before I could, the lights flickered again, and then went out completely. I stood there in total darkness for a few seconds, and that's when I felt it. Something pushed my shoulder hard. I turned around in a panic, but once again, the bathroom was empty. The silence now felt suffocating, like the entire place was waiting for something. Then the laughter came again, but this time from all around me. There were many voices, as if people were standing just out of sight, watching and laughing. The lights flickered back on, and for a split second, I saw shadows darting around the room, moving between the mirrors and walls. My fear spiked, and I just wanted to get out of there as fast as I could. I rushed toward the door, but as I reached it, the door slammed shut with a force that couldn't have come from the light breeze outside. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what was happening, and that's when I felt another presence. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I wasn't alone anymore. I looked in the mirror, and in the reflection, I saw 3 figures standing behind me. Their faces were distorted, with exaggerated, eerie smiles, as if they were mocking my fear. They began to move toward me slowly, still laughing. The sound of their laughter bounced off the walls, growing louder, more maddening. I pounded on the door, desperate to escape, but it felt like it was locked from the inside. The small bathroom, which had seemed cramped before, now felt like a vast, endless trap of cold tiles and darkness. The laughter intensified, and I felt invisible hands shoving me against the walls, forcing me to stay. Suddenly, the light flickered one last time, and without warning, the door burst open with a loud bang. I didn't hesitate. I ran out of that bathroom as fast as I could, my heart racing, and bolted back to my truck. My hands were shaking so badly it took a few tries to start the engine. But when I finally did, I sped out of that gas station without looking back. To this day, I don't know what really happened that night. All I know is that I've never stopped at an isolated gas station in the middle of the night again. That experience haunts me, and every time I hear a faint laugh or feel a sudden chill, I remember that bathroom and the shadows that were laughing at me. Something was waiting for me on that road that night. Something I never want to encounter again.
Story 4. The Shadowed Hitchhiker.
I've been a truck driver for years, ever since I turned 25. I always liked the open road, the quiet, the freedom that came with long hauls. I'm from Billings, Montana, and I usually drive across the country for work. But one night, heading down Interstate 90 towards Spokane, something happened that I'll never forget. It changed the way I look at the road forever. It was around 1 a.m., and I was fighting off sleep. The road was empty, and a light rain was falling, making everything wet and slick. That's when I saw her, a woman standing by the side of the road under a tree, soaked from the rain. She was wearing this old white dress, and she stared out at the road like she was waiting for something. I didn't think twice. I pulled over, figuring she needed help. She climbed into the truck slowly, sat in the passenger seat without a word, and just pointed ahead, like she wanted to go in the same direction I was headed. I tried to talk to her, asked if she was okay, but she just stared out the windshield with this blank expression. She didn't say a word. The air in the truck felt thick, like something wasn't right, like the temperature had dropped even though the heater was on. But I kept driving, trying to shake off the unease that was building inside me. The further we went, the stranger it got. I started feeling like I wasn't alone, like there was something more in the truck besides just me and her. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the rearview mirror. I thought it was my imagination at first, but when I looked again, I could make out a shadow in the back seat, like someone was sitting there. My heart skipped a beat, but when I turned around to check, there was nothing. Just the empty back of the truck. I kept driving, but the tension in the air was getting worse. The silence between me and the woman was suffocating. Every minute that passed felt like an hour. Then out of nowhere, I heard a quiet, soft sobbing coming from her side. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. And that's when things got really weird. The radio turned on by itself. I hadn't touched it. There was no music, no static, just a voice, deep and distorted, saying, "Turn back, now." My stomach dropped. I glanced over at the woman, and now she was smiling, but not in a way that felt right. It was this eerie, unnatural smile, like she knew something I didn't. My hands were shaking on the wheel, and I felt cold sweat running down my neck. I wanted to pull over, to jump out and run, but I couldn't. It was like something was holding me in place, like I was trapped in that truck with her and whatever was in the back. I finally decided to pull off at the next rest stop. As I slowed down and stopped the truck, the woman turned her head slowly toward me. Her skin was pale, her eyes dark, almost black. She stared at me for a moment before she spoke in this low, chilling voice. "You shouldn't have stopped." And then, just like that, she vanished. No sound, no movement. She was just gone. I sat there in the driver's seat, heart racing, staring at the empty seat next to me. The rain was still tapping on the windshield, but everything else was dead quiet. I jumped out of the truck, looking around, but there was no one on the road, no sign of her anywhere. I was alone, completely alone. When I finally got the courage to climb back into the truck, I checked the rearview mirror again, and there it was, clear as day this time. A shadowy figure sitting in the back seat, its face twisted and empty, staring right at me. I floored the gas, speeding down the highway, trying to get away. I don't know how long I drove, but I didn't dare stop until I felt safe. When I finally glanced back again, the shadow was gone, but the radio, even though it was off, kept whispering that same distorted voice. "Turn back, now," over and over again, like a curse. Since that night, I've never picked up another hitchhiker, and every time I drive that stretch of road, I get the feeling something's still there, something waiting,